Okay, we're live.
Good evening, Madam Mayor. It's 6 o'clock and we're live.
All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our electric utility meeting. I'd like the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mayor Pam Triola,
Here.
Vice Mayor Andy Amoroso,
Here.
Commissioner Scott Maxwell is absent for the role. Commissioner Omari Hardy,
Here.
Commissioner Herman Robinson.
Here.
Thank you.
Are there any additions, deletions, or reordering, Madam Clerk?
Let's do the pledge. There are none, but let's do the pledge first.
Okay, you got it. And Mr. Maxwell was supposed to do it, so let's how about the Vice Mayor? Would you lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
And to the republic
Which stands
one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so City Clerk, you said no additions, deletions, or reordering.
There are none that I'm aware of.
Okay, we'll move right on to our presentations. It's an electric utility update by Ed Liberty. Good evening, Ed.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. I'll open up with some off-the-cuff comments before we get into the actual presentation for discussion tonight. The first thing is just a reminder that I did drop off on your desks, or we did ask to get dropped off your desk late tonight, the annual reports from the last discussion. I know we did it remotely looking at the presentation online, but now you should have hard copies. Couple of things that I do want to point out in there. One was the gains that we made in reliability, but I think a slide that's kind of helpful is on page 5. We see the installed solar watts per customer, which is currently 63. And by 2024, we'll be at 1,423. So that's, as you look at your booklets for the annual report, and I'll hold one up here. Yeah, you'll see that we're gonna go from a low number to a very, very high number. So that's a big step forward on sustainability. Again, this is all on the citizendonenergy.com website, and you just have the hard copy now to flip through. Some pretty nice graphics that were done for us there. In terms of sustainability, I want to take a step further and just remind everybody that by 2024, over 50% of our energy is going to come from a carbon-free resource. That's a combination of nuclear and solar. So that's a huge step. So we go from 63 watts of solar today to 1,423 by then, and we'll be over 50% of our energy coming from carbon-free resources. By 2025, more importantly, we will have reduced our carbon footprint. Our CO2 emissions rate will be less than half of what it was back in 2005. So we're taking a big step forward in the next few years as we bring more solar into our portfolio. And what we haven't taken into account there, which we're encouraging our partners on the OUC Stanton project, is to work towards eventual retirement of that unit or a conversion to gas. So the small percentage that we have today that comes from coal could go away completely. So we're making great strides. And as you may or know, the work that you've been doing nationally to promote ocean current energy, we're hopeful that that will play a role in our energy supply in the not too distant future. So
I'm looking forward to that. Boy, oh boy, am I.
Yes, we all look forward to the day when we see that. So that's the message on sustainability for tonight. The other thing I wanted to point out was to give some props to people that have been volunteered or voluntold or have stepped forward and want to help us out on some stuff. We have an app, a phone-based app that's been in development, being led by Joel, who's got it pretty well along. And we've put together a group that includes 2 members from the Utility Advisory Board, 2 members from the City Commission, and 2 staff members in the city to play with the app and try to break it and make suggestions on how to make it better, improve the look and feel, test it out. We have found a couple of small things that we're fixing, but we need that feedback. It's not yet ready for prime time for rollout to the general public, but we want to test it out. So, shout out to the folks, particularly on the UAB, Ibrahim Shaloub and Mark Mezancello, who are on a commercial side. They have both residential and commercial accounts, and they're testing it from that point of view, and they have multiple accounts. 2 members of the City Commission. If you want to raise your hands, you certainly can. I don't want to out you as doing the demo, but thank you for your participation. And I believe Ben is working on it as well as a homeowner in town, as is Jason from our system operations group. I'm working with it as well. And Joel, of course, continues to try to break it to see if we can get it to be even better, and Franco as well. So that's coming along. Also want to point out that the UAB does have an item that they had put some time into that had to do with utility deposits. We were headed towards a workshop. Current events kind of overtook us, other things, but the Utility Advisory Board at some point in the future will be calling them in to present to you on their opinion and thoughts on what to do with utility deposits, how to approach that. It's probably more appropriate after we get through some of the things we're talking about tonight to look very closely at their recommendation. That they did vote on a recommendation, but I'll let them present that. And that's been very, very helpful. A shout out to our employees who have been working very carefully and very safely through this whole COVID-19 crisis. We've been on split shifts, A and B. Can't say enough about the help that we've gotten from the IBEW and our other unions, but particularly the IBEW, who has done a great job. They continue to work on the conversion project now in the northeast part of the city. You see me glancing over to my notes here to get the numbers right. But so far, while this COVID-19 crisis has been going on, they've converted 131 out of 280 customers that they'll eventually have converted by mid to late June, have been converted from the old 4 kV system to the newer 26 kV system. So that's going to do a lot of good for us. It's actually going to move those customers to a better voltage, but it's going to relieve the load on the system that they came off of. So that helps the customers that they're no longer tied to. And they're also working to get those systems looped. So if you're in that northeast part of the city, you've seen them doing a lot of work there. If you're on the western part of the territory, you've seen probably 130 or so new poles installed out there, and a lot of new work that was done out there by our contractors. The next area that we'll tackle with our own workforce will be the southeast part of the city. Jason and our engineering team have come up with another great idea to get some more conversions, and we'll be talking with the IBEW about how to keep that going as well. So a shout out to them. Our other unions have done an awfully great job too. Customer service, they're just doing a great job keeping everybody safe, and also managing to have done a transition from having over 4,000 customer transactions a month in person at the customer service center are now being done 100% without those customers having to come through the door at all. They're all being done remotely, electronically, by phone, by email, and using some of our web services. So if you think about it, those 4,000 people, and if you have spent any time down there, very few of them actually came in by themselves. Many of them came in with kids in tow, a spouse, a parent, a friend. So it was far more than 4,000 people a month coming into customer service. There's probably more like 6,000 to 8,000 people coming through that facility. So even if we did not have this COVID-19 crisis, we just think to the flu season, for example, we've just had a tremendous reduction in exposure. But more importantly, we've changed the way that we do business. The days when you did business by having to present yourself at a city office are really behind us. If you think about some of the great companies that are out there today, you don't have to present yourself in their office to transact business with them. You can do it globally and remotely. You don't have to take time off from work. You can do it during your lunch period or during a break. You can do it in the morning. You can do it into the evening. You can call our customer service center into the evening, things like that, without having to take time off from work. Now that's particularly important for somebody who's setting up a new account, for example, who now has to, while they're loading their belongings onto a truck or having them unloaded to try to get in a new property, having to remember to run down to the city office, stand in line for some indefinite period of time with a mask on, waiting to get their number called so they can get it to the window and fill out the forms to open the account. That's all gone. That's all being done now remotely online. We can welcome our folks to the city and do it all remotely and process all the paperwork. And we've done that without any impact on the positions that we had in customer service as well. So we didn't lay anybody off in this time to go do that. And we don't anticipate having to lay anybody off to do this. It's working really, really well. The bulk of the workforce will transition back for us on June 1. We'll eliminate the AB shift. With the exception of our T&D, what we call our line department, that from June 1 on during the hurricane season, summer season, has an afternoon shift anyway. So those folks will be on the afternoon. We'll continue to practice social distancing. We don't mix trucks between crews, for example. People keep their own tools, keep their own equipment, stay separate, but we'll be back to a full complement on the line department. Same thing with the power plant. Power plant folks have also done a great job. We tend not to think of them too much because the power plant doesn't run much these days, but you know, they're the fire department with the old fire truck. They keep it ready to run all the time. They've been called to run on very short notice, and they've answered that bell and that call every single time without issue. So they're doing a great job there as well. And we do appreciate that. So that's the shout outs for what we're doing right now. Is there any questions on that while I work to set up the screen share for the PowerPoint for tonight?
Vice Mayor?
Ed, I wanted to thank you and your staff for the app. I have multiple businesses that I've been testing, both home and business. And I haven't found any problems. You know, I think it's a great, new tool. How soon will we be able to use this?
I'd say we probably want to try to break it at least for another 30 days or so. And I'll be checking with Joel frequently to see how he thinks it's going. And of course, Franco, to make sure there's no glitches in terms of customers trying to make a payment using the app. We know that we can check the bills. There were a couple of glitches that I noticed on accounts where there were multiple meters on the same account, which may exist in some cases. Multiple electric meters, for example, which one was showing. There was also a slight time difference. That might have been daylight savings time between what I was seeing in our AMI system and what the app was telling us. So we got to work through those little glitches because it could throw you off. For example, if you see energy use go up at 7 o'clock in your home and you say, gee, that's odd. We didn't start doing anything until 10 o'clock on a Saturday. Why the lag, or 9 o'clock? So we need to work through that and make sure we understand the timing and get those atomic clocks, if you will, to synchronize. But
and then talk to me a little bit about the prepay option, because I'm a supporter of the prepay, and especially as we move into a time where we want to encourage new businesses. Under the prepay, from what I understand, if you are a small business and you opt into the prepay, you have the ability of not paying that huge amount of deposit because you're on a prepay plan. So, I like that idea, especially for new businesses, new small businesses coming into town as an option to give them the ability to do that and not have to come up with so much money. When you're opening a new business, it's a lot of money to, all the different business licenses and all the different things. To not have to come up with such a large amount is huge for a small business.
Now that's important. And, I'm not sure that I've walked a mile in your shoes in terms of running a small business, but I might have walked a half a mile and running a bigger business at one time in the past. That was not an investor-owned company. But you're right. It's a big negative cash flow, big negative outlay to set up your utility funds. So I think that, and I know that if we had a prepay option that was approved to be used and the app is compatible with a prepay option, those small businesses could, in essence, prepay rather than having to put up large deposits. It's also going to be helpful to residents who may be moving into a home that was previously occupied by a large family, for example, and they might be moving in with only 2 or 3 people, and they're not going to be in the home much, maybe. And their energy consumption is going to be much lower than the predecessor, yet their deposit is based on the predecessor consumption and would be much higher. So if they could go on a prepay option, that eliminates the need for us to have a deposit at all. And then what we could do is, after 12 months or some period of time of continued usage, review the account and say, hey, if you want to come off a prepay, we now have a really good idea what your deposit should be. And we do away with the deposit. So the prepay tool would be pretty interesting to be able to bring to our customer base.
And you've heard me say before, especially when I was had a business on the island in Palm Beach, but even now we're still very seasonal. And to give the small business an option of prepaying during season and, having that ability so you're not so strapped in the summertime, that's a huge thing for me. And I would assume other businesses that I've talked to.
Yeah. Yeah, utility deposits, there's good rationales to why utilities need deposits. But it is also a form of stranded capital that you'd like to be able to put to work in your business rather than just have it sitting in a city account earning, even though it's earning some interest.
And also by having the prepay, you're stopping that long-term ability for them to go 2 or 3 months without paying and then leaving the city with that burden.
Right. So that's the type of thing that we're going to want to talk more about. We can touch, we're touching on it now. It does link up well with the discussion for this evening, but it's something that we need to talk more about, and that we don't currently have that option. So something we'd have to seek the commission's approval to implement in the future.
Thank you.
Together with an overall look, a fresh look at what we do with deposits.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ed, along these lines, I don't want to belabor the point, but there were a lot of positive angles as far as the prepay program is concerned. But in practice, how, in very short, just 30 words or less, in short, how does that work? If, you pay, I guess, let's say the first of the month is your prepay date, the first of the month comes and goes, you don't make that next prepay payment. What happens in practice?
Your meter would be shut off, disconnected remotely. So these will all have to be remote disconnect meters. So the home will, or the business will lose power when it gets to the end of its prepay, balance. But what we need to do is to make sure that the folks get an ample warning, in terms of maybe number of days leading up to that event. So it's not a surprise that suddenly, oh, I forgot to replenish my prepay card. Now my lights are out and I've got 30 people in my shop, right? Or what in my business or my restaurant. We want to make sure that business owners, or if it's in a residential application, that people know as they get closer to the expiration of their debit, if you will, their debit or the prepaid card, that they know it's coming, that they need to replenish it.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm looking forward to having that conversation.
Yeah. The last thing that we want to do is catch people by surprise. That's not who we are. And that's not what Citizen Don't Energy is all about. So we want to make sure that people have ample time and notice and reminders, who among us hasn't forgotten to pay a bill on time, right? And said, oh no, it's one thing to find out because you just got, your ear, told by your significant others that, what did you do? It's another thing to actually have the lights go out when you're trying to get the kids out the door to go to school, right? Or get off to work. So that we need to have those processes in place before we deploy that.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on. I'm sorry, Commissioner Robinson, I didn't see your hand up.
Yeah, I just put it up. I just wanted to thank Ed for moving in, us to the future, but education about the usage, how to use it, and the advantages. Education is expensive and important.
That's true. And the only people that will go on to either the app, for example, that was unrelated to prepay, or if they go on to prepay, it's going to be optional. It's going to be something that the customer selects, and it will take some time to explain to them how it works, so they're familiar with the option. What we don't want to do is have people just automatically just clicking the options. Oh, no deposit, I just take this, without really realizing what they just committed themselves to.
You didn't tell me.
Exactly.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to your presentation, Ed.
Okay, let me make sure I can get it up on the screen here correctly. Okay, does everybody have the presentation up on the screen? It starts with a cover slide.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll go through it and ask questions along the way. So this first slide is, you've seen this probably a few times. We update this right before every meeting, and Jason actually maintains this for me. There's some interesting things here, other than a whole bunch of, it looks like hieroglyphics and spaghetti talk. Let me walk you through what are some of the things. If we look in the first, or the second column, which is kilowatt hours, fiscal year to date, all the way down the bottom, we see that we've grown at 0.366%. you'd say, wow, we're growing at a fraction of a percent. Gee, that's important. The fact is that we are growing, we are not shrinking. We are a growing enterprise. We're sending more power out to our customers than we did in the prior year. And we want to understand why is that. Overall, some of our customers have decreased, and we'll talk about that while others have increased. But we are still growing in spite of this crisis. We are still seeing increase in electricity going out to our customer base, even though our commercial customers are using far less, and they're typically much more energy intensive. The next column helps to explain a little bit of that. That's the total degree days. So these are degree days. We track this from the nearest airport, which is PBI, and we're up a little over 12% year to date. So on a year to date basis, it's been a warmer year. And these, by the way, are on a fiscal year, not a calendar year, on a fiscal year. Our customer count, which is, it says CUST FYTD, that's customers in fiscal year to date. You'll see that that's growing by 1%. Now, what does that number mean? If you look up above that, you'll see 1,978. That doesn't mean that we added 1,978 customers. You say, wow, that's a big leap. Why is it only 1%? What that means is that we have 1,978 more customer months this year than we did last year. So let's say you sign up as a customer, you're here for 1 month. That's a 1. Let's say you sign up as a customer, you're here for 12 months. That's a 12, right? So total, those two customers are 13 customer months. When we look at our customer months, it's growing. When we take that 1978, I don't have my calculator in front of me, but if you divide that by 12 months, or divide it by 7 months, which is the number of months we've had year to date, you see a pretty significant number. That's the actual equivalent number of new customers are added. So what this is telling me is that even though we are landlocked in terms of the size of our territory, we continue to grow. Means that we've got more meters spinning this year than we did last year. That means that people are continuing to move into Lake Worth. Now, if we look at the number of new housing starts that have taken place in Lake Worth, it's not a huge number. Not yet. Those are coming, right? But what this is telling me is that we have a lot of units that were previously vacant that had had a meter in the past that now have a meter spinning and on the rolls as a new customer. So our property, our residential density, if you will, or density of inhabitants is growing. We're getting more people in the service territory, and we're growing by 1.06%. These numbers are important to us because we want to make sure that we have a growing enterprise and not a dying enterprise. And we're certainly growing. Lake Worth Beach is a place that more and more people continue to move to, even though we don't have a tremendous number of new housing starts. Now, when things like the Mid or the Bohemian, the One, or as Joel has dubbed it, the other one gets going, we'll see our customer counts actually grow significantly. What's good about this is we actually plan on about 0.5% per year when we do our budgeting. So this is in line with what we budgeted for, and good to see. Then to the right of that, what we show is the total degree days just for the month of May, kilowatt hours for May, and the customer count for April. We don't have a customer count for May because May hasn't completed yet, so we don't have that column filled in. But you see that May, the degree days have actually gone down through May 18th, and with all the rain we're having, the degree days may stay down a little bit. And the average daily peak has gone down in 2020 for the month of May, the early part of May versus 2019. So we do track these things pretty close. It helps us understand the demographic in terms of numbers of customers that we have in the system and what's happening. It means a lot to us. Just trying to give you some of the highlights so you understand what we're looking at. This chart you saw in some fashion earlier. The trend that we've seen continues. We started this back in January, and you can see about halfway across when you get to about March 11, March 13, 15, 17, 19, you see that the commercial drops off and the residential goes up. So that's telling us in numbers what we all know is that people are home and businesses are closed. What's very interesting though is in spite of the fact that commercial or businesses are closed, they've bottomed out at about 20. So that seems to be about the floor of the commercial consumption. That tells us that the commercial businesses are having to, continue to condition their buildings or keep their refrigerators going, keep the freezers cold, keep the air conditioning on, keep dehumidification going, and that's about the floor. And then you can see where residential has gone from being about 60% of the energy consumption that we bring into the system to about 70%. The peaks, of course, are probably weekdays, they could be weekends, and the valleys would follow that on the commercial side. This slide you saw at the last meeting, but you saw it as what we call a 6 and 6. We now have a 7 and 5. So we have 7 months actual plus 5 months forecast. And we do this every month. We capture a snapshot of what we've booked, if you will, and then we forecast ahead for the rest of the year. We were forecasting operating income to be a little over $6 million. I think we were at about $5.7 million on the 6 and 6. Now we're about 6. What we did in the section B below is we looked at, or I guess it's two, it's like a bunch of section Bs. We looked at what happens if our residential and commercial electric customers drop off by 10% in terms of revenue. And we looked at what happens if they drop off by as much as 15%. Now, you can see that we would go, if they dropped off by 10%, we'd go from a $6 million beat, if you will, against the budget on operating income to a $3.2 million beat. So we go down. And then, of course, if we see a 15% reduction, we go down to about 1.796 million, 1.8 million. Now, it's important to point out here that these things are not linear because it's not like we've lost the customer. The customers are still there. You just showed the slide before that actual energy consumption is up by 0.366%, right? Residential are using more and commercials are using less, and we're growing. What this is saying to us is this is a scenario where they don't pay because we're continuing to deliver the service. For example, we're continuing to buy power to deliver to them, and we're paying our bills, especially the power bill. But we've seen a decrease in revenue. So this is an attempt to show what happens to our operating income. So one of the questions that you would ask is, well, where does this operating income go? Well, the good thing is that it's positive in these scenarios, but the operating income is going to rebuilding our electric utility fund balance from the previous years where it had gone negative. This is being used to accelerate, if you will, ramp up out of that negative position, cross the zero mark into the positive territory. We still are waiting for the 2019 audited financials, and they're underway by the finance department, and they'll be with us shortly. But we expect that we'll still be short of the recommended $10.5 million fund balance for working capital that Stantec recommends. So as soon as we have the audited financials, we'll transfer this information over and be able to tell you how we're doing on the coverage in terms of how much of our O&M we have in reserve. So the fund balance is important for us to protect, and this just tees it up. Now, why did we pick 10 and 15%? Well, we picked.
Hold on one second. Vice Mayor, did you have something on this slide?
I'm sorry, Vice.
You're muted.
I think you
You're
might
Vice
be
Mayor,
muted.
you're muted.
No, Madam Mayor, thank you. I can wait. I'm just making some notes. I don't want to go too far without, asking a few questions.
Okay.
I didn't know how far we were going to go into the slide. I'm making notes, so I can come back. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Please, Ed, continue. Sorry for that.
I've lost my raise hand button.
Commissioner Robinson?
I just was going to ask about the separation of commercial and real estate dollars. Am I missing it on this chart or?
No, that's not on this chart. That's on the next one that's coming.
Okay, and well, looking forward to that.
Okay, so the question was, if I know I'm toggling back and forth here, why are we looking at a 10% reduction and why are we looking at a 15% reduction? we come to that conclusion by looking at this next slide, which is the utilities aging report. Now, as a lot of the slides that I give you is busy, there's a lot of information here, but let me walk you through it. If we look in the top left-hand corner, with the block on the left, that's all what we call 30-day aging. And the 30-day aging report is anything that's over 30 days late, more than 30 days late, but not yet 60 days late. So this is between 30 days and 59 days late. And we look at in the column, it says 318. That column there is what these numbers were on March 18th when we began the process or when we stopped disconnecting people's services. These are where we were. So if we just look at it real closely, our total commercial exposure at that point, more than 30 days late, was $41,231. By the way, this data is combined for water and electric and sewer. This is combined numbers because I also manage the customer service function, which is for all of the utilities, right? So this function here, this slide is applicable to the combination, and then we'll break it out in the slide in more detail for whether it's water or electric. So our exposure at the 30-day mark when this process started was 41,000. If we slide slightly to the right, we see that as of May 22nd, and this is partly why these slides have been updated for you today, why you got updates today, because the ones that we sent you last week, those numbers change every day, and we wanted to give you the most current numbers as of the start of the weekend, and Franco did work on this through the weekend to get us these numbers. So today, that 30-day exposure has gone from $41,000 to $90,000 on the commercial side. On the residential side, it's gone from $84,999, let's call that $85,000, to $275,000. So that's water and electric combined. So if we look at the next line, we're looking at the residential and commercial electric numbers. And we can see that we're now at, on the electric, residential, and commercial 30 days, we're at $240,000. And if we go down to water and sewer, that's $110,000. So all of our utilities combined on the 30-day aging are almost $400,000. So $399,345 that are more than 30 days late. That's an increase of 218% over where we were on March 18th. You don't have to remember the percentages other than say that's a lot. It's gone from a $240,000 to $399,000. If we shift to the right, the block to the right is the same logic. It's just showing you what it looks like if you only look at what's 60 days or more. So you could take the bottom right-hand corner and say, wow, today we have $211,000 that's 60 days or more in arrears. When we started this process, it was only $19,000. This doesn't surprise me because on May 18th, we hit the 60-day mark from the cessation of service disconnects, right? So anybody who didn't pay on the 18th hit the 30-day on 4/18 and then hit the 60-day on 5/18. So that's why we see this aging report going up. So we've gone from 0.4%. So I'm looking at the bottom row of 60-day aging, from 0.4% on the 60-day aging to 3.5% of our revenues are out 60 days or more, while 9.8 are out between 30 and 59 days. So we're looking at close to 14% or so of our revenues are significant on an aging report. That's the purpose of this slide. This next slide you've seen in some format fashion before. This is how our payments come in. And if we look at the payment type in the top, you can see, generally speaking, our credit cards are running between 42 to 45% 47% of all of the bills that get paid are coming in by credit card. That's a number to pay very close attention to, because that comes at a significant cost to us. The credit card fees that we pay are growing significantly. That's going to be a much higher number in the budget next year. The credit card companies are raising the fees that they charge us, particularly as customers use more and more rewards cards. So we've tried to control that, but that number is going up significantly. We know that that's around $250,000 to $280,000 a year. That is probably going to go up in next year's budget to $400,000 plus of fees that we're picking up as a city for credit cards. Checks are pretty constant, e-checks. All of these numbers are relatively constant. But if we look at the number of transactions, you can see that the number of transactions declined significantly in April. Now, April tends to have fewer transactions, has to do with the number of billing cycles when the bills come due, but it's still running a few thousand, 2,000 or 3,000 plus transactions lower than normal, which is telling us that there's fewer people paying their bills. We don't have a comparison to the prior year up on the screen here, but what we do see is that the number of bills being paid is decreasing, which is tying to the aging report. So all of these things are following suit. We try to look at these things multiple ways so we don't have any anomalies. Payment detail, 21% of people are paying by mail, 37% are paying online, 10% are using the ACH process. The auto pay feature is going up just slightly because we do offer an incentive to people to go on auto pay if they take the paperless bill option and go into an auto pay function, which is good. It saves us on a postage. The drop box is dropped off a little bit, which is good. And the Paymentus process is pretty constant. And Pay Near Me is pretty constant as well. That grew nicely, that transitioned well. We had some bumps in the road early on in January, but that's improved greatly. And beginning shortly, the barcodes will be as a part of the bill, so they won't have to go to a separate place to download the barcodes. They'll have those all on the bill. They'll be able to walk right into a Pay Near Me location and have an easier transaction. So these things are the things that helped us get to the point where we don't have over 4,000 people a month coming through our customer service doors. We handle all of these things online now. I see Commissioner Robinson has raised a hand.
Well, I was just wondering about any numbers or percentage or any data on people that are trying to make a part payment.
Actually, Commissioner Robinson, would you mind terribly if I heard from the vice? He's had his hand up the whole time. And no, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure
I've lost my button here. I don't know. I've lost my buttons. Yeah.
Yeah, just wait till you're recognized if you don't mind. All right, thank you. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ed, when we first had the conversation a while back about accounts that were inactive or not paying, we had a number on those. Do you have a new number on that of the accounts? I mean, we're looking at physical numbers, but do you know how many residents or how many accounts have not paid or are behind?
Yes, 1,578. It's on the bottom of slide number 7. And this is as of a few days ago. That number goes up and down slightly every day, but it's settled out at about 1,578.
Okay, and it makes total sense that, you know, because people are stuck at home, their utility bills will be going up, they're using more. And then on the slide that we're on now, I think you answered it. So my question was going to be, which one of these categories costs us the most to do business? So you said it was credit cards?
Yes, if we look at the payment type, the credit cards are certainly the highest in terms of the cost to the city. That's something, and we're obviously not asking for anybody to vote on anything tonight. This is informational. But that's something that perhaps should be looked at as an expense. That does add a cost that's, you know, a part of everybody's bill.
But that's what I was going to ask, how often do we look at that and bid that out? As a small business owner, I get people knocking down my door. I get emails, people walking in on a regular basis that says they can save me percentages on my credit card use. And, I shop that around, yearly. Is that something we can do? Is it more for municipalities? How does that work? Is that something we really, because if it's going from 28 to 4, we really need to see what we can do to bring those numbers down.
Right. So I know that finance has their eyes on this, and this is something that they want to tackle with it. They have to relook at the overall banking relationship. And I'm not an expert in this area and how they do this, but that is something that Bruce does intend to go after and take a closer look at. The bigger issue, though, is should the city be picking up this expense? The surrounding utility does not pick up this expense. When you go to pay your bill in that utility, if you want to use a credit card, the customer pays the credit card fee, not the utility.
Well, and years ago we looked at that, and for some reason I thought we were told that we couldn't do it. I think speaking for the mayor and Commissioner Maxwell, when we looked at this years ago, we all agreed on yeah, we should not be picking up this expense. However, we still are. And as we move forward, if we have to pick up this expense and we can't lower the expense, then maybe we need to look at what other line item is here that we should be directing people to try to save, because at the end of the day, the taxpayers, it's a taxpayer, it's a utility that's owned by its residents, and we need to try to do whatever we can to lower some of these costs.
Right. So that's true. That it's my understanding that the current system will not allow to have the customer pick up the charge. But I know that Bruce does intend to look at how we can change that. In all fairness to Bruce, he's been working very hard to get the financial side of the house in order and trying to get the financials completed. So, but I know it's on his radar as something that he very much wants to do.
Okay, because we've been pushing people to do more online, and it looks like that's going to cost us more money unless, the prepay or the pay near me is a better option, and we could start pushing people towards that and wean off if, it looks like the credit card online is the most expensive option for us.
Yeah, the credit card online is by far the most expensive option. So,
but that's probably the one that people are going to use the most. And like I said, for years, we've been pushing that to try to get, away from the walk-ins.
Right. Well, 45% of the population is using the credit cards. And the other 55% are helping pay for it because it does come at a cost, and that cost is spread across all of the customers.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Robinson?
That's life. Spreading the cost around is everybody's challenge. The question was about people making a part payment. Is there? Did I miss that or?
I know Franco is on the video conference. Off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure customers are making some partial payments. But Franco, if you're on the call, jump in.
Yeah, I am, Ed. Madam Mayor and Commissioners, we don't have any data to present to you though about how many people made partial payments. I'll look into it and see what can be done for you. But right now we have that slide that we presented earlier that Ed showed you that showed everyone that is past due right now, which is 1,578 accounts.
May I speak?
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Robinson.
That would be important when we talk about discontinuing or starting up shuttle. So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Vice Mayor Pro Tem, you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. Madam Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Someone's got background noise. Someone had a repeat on there. Okay.
I know we're trying to get through this presentation, but as the Vice Mayor said earlier, I don't want us to get too far down this with some questions that need to be addressed. First of all, Ed, if you go back to slide number 6, customer payment methods, and I believe you stated something to the effect that on the top box, number of transactions was a reflection of how many bills were actually paid during those 5 months. Is that correct?
Yes, in each one of the months, we show the number of transactions that we've had, regardless of what type it was, the total number of payments that were made.
Right. Well, at first blush, it didn't surprise me that February would be lower because there are fewer days in February, but based on your definition of what that number represents, I'm curious as to why February would have, 3,000 less payments on average, excluding, if you dismiss April, why February would have 3,000 less payments than the other 3 months.
It could just be the payment cycles that people are on, the meter read cycle, which then drives the payment cycle. How many people paid on time versus how many people paid late, waited till close to the late fee date or close to the disconnect date and suddenly made payments.
Wow.
It's hard to tell.
Well, it looks like that's about a 10% swing for the 1 month. And
It is.
I thought that was kind of curious. Also, if I'm following along with the math, if we go back to your slide number, oh Lord, I guess slide number 1, the updated one, receivables. I believe I took your, well, let me get my phone out here, do that math again. There was a number in there. Shoot. Anyway, I figured that based on your numbers on slide 2, which is 1578, that roughly the average bill that is delinquent is about $237. Does that sound about right?
It sounds about right. We're going to see that in a little bit more detail in a later slide.
Okay. And the next question I have too, while we're talking about forms of payment and whatever, debit cards are considered the same as credit cards. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Yeah,
That is correct.
that is it's not right. They push debit cards and they turn around and stick the merchants with the fee for taking a debit card. But here's my comment on the auto pay function, on the auto pay option. Are we offering any incentives for folks to use the auto pay?
I believe, yes, we are. Franco, you want to answer that?
Yep, as soon as I get it off mute. Yes, we are. There is a $25 incentive to sign up for auto pay and paperless.
Well, what about monthly? A point off your bill or something?
No, it's a $25 one-time credit that's applied to your bill.
Okay. Well, I'm just wondering if there might not be, don't want to start a robust conversation here, but it just seems to me that if we know these folks are not going to be mailed a bill and they're going to be in the auto pay system, it just seems to me that there might be an opportunity there to offer some sort of a little monthly, 1% reduction or 0.5% or something like that. I don't know. I've obviously not run the math. Just a thought when we start talking about, maybe doing something differently with credit cards and trying to get around or work through, if you will, the discount rate the banks charge. So, well, that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hardy? Commissioner Hardy?
Yep, I know it was said once, I just want to make sure I have the right number. Total amount that we budget for credit card fees and the total amount of credit card fees that we're going to expect for next year. You said that we're going to have to budget more for credit card fees because they've been coming in more than we've actually budgeted for. So I'd like to know how much we budgeted for and how much you think we're going to need on an annual basis. How much is it actually costing us?
So we budget approximately $250,000 to $280,000 a year for fees, and the early indications are that we'd be up around $400,000 for the next fiscal year.
Okay. And the next thing, if we're trying to get a handle on transactions, I would first of all need a point of comparison. As Commissioner Maxwell suggested,
there may be fewer transactions in February because it's a month with fewer days, but I wouldn't be able to know if there's a relationship between the change from January to February without looking at that from year to year. And so I guess if in the future we could, be able to compare December 19 transactions to December 18 transactions, January 20 to January 19, and so on, so we can see the relationship, but also see that and the relationship to the number of users that we have, right? Because if we have fewer users or a lot more users from one time to the next, as you've noted, there's been a little growth, it would be hard to see how much of the change from one month to the next would be due to things unrelated to the number of users. So if we could see transactions from one month to the next year over year, that would be great. And then also compared to the number of users, during those periods, that would be great as well, perhaps in the next presentation in the future.
Sure.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
We have the data. We can do that.
Vice Mayor?
I'm okay at the moment. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Vice Mayor Pro Tem? You're on mute.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm wondering when you start talking about the uptick, if you will, and looks like we're going to run over budget on credit card fees. It looks to me that can be found, excuse me, it's probably directly reflected in the number of cash payments that are no longer being taken. If you look at the numbers, it looks like when you look at December, you had 10% paid cash to local office and 1% local near me. And then as you look at the other numbers, you're only getting 6-7% instead of the 10 or 11%. So there may be people moving from a cash payment system to a credit card system. And that's might be explain some of the increase in the credit card usage. Again, maybe it's a good opportunity. Historically, it's paid by cash. And I'll get them on an auto pay system. Thank you.
Hey, Ed, Madam Mayor, Ed, may I elaborate a little bit on the credit card processing fees? Ed, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Franco, do you have another computer on or something else? You have two items on because one of them is reverbing.
No, I don't.
Do you, anyone else hear that? No? Okay. It was just an echo.
Well, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So just to clarify on the credit card processing fees and the reasons why they went up, because we are a utility, we have a discounted rate whenever they pay with a debit card or a credit card. The only time that we don't qualify or we can't use the utility rate is when they use what I call a rewards credit card, something that gives them miles or points. That gets processed at the higher fee, which is 2.65% of the total transaction. If they pay with a regular credit card or a regular debit card, it's a fraction of the transaction. It's just a flat rate for the transaction, up to $5,000. So when I look at the invoices that have been coming in monthly, the large majority of the increase in our processing fees are all related to what I call rewards credit cards. And I've spoken to the vendor. There's no way to block them, no way to stop them. What other municipalities have done is to pass that fee on to the end user. A lot of municipalities are doing it. Our current vendor has the capability to do it. It just needs to be approved and made the change.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that, Franco. I would also think that the use of credit cards would be going up into this pandemic situation because people aren't working, they're not getting paid, and they're putting their utility bills on their credit cards because they have to, because they're not receiving regular paychecks or stimulus that they need or whatever it else may be. So I think that it might be a big increase right now. Hopefully, maybe as people get back to work or as more stimulus money comes or as people get rehired or whatever, that we might see some of that coming down a little bit, but I'm sure that has something to do with it. Wouldn't you think, Ed? Ed? Can you unmute yourself?
There we go. I'm sorry. Yes, that's certainly possible. It's the fact of life is there's 30+ million people unemployed right now in the country. People are using credit cards probably more.
Yeah, I'm sure. Vice Mayor, did you have your hand up?
Madam Mayor, I think Franco answered my question. So Franco, in my business, I have the ability to not take American Express, but I think you stated that we don't have the ability to not take these higher rate cards. Is that correct?
Madam Mayor, that is correct, Vice Mayor. I've already spoken to the vendor several times about this. As soon as I saw the initial invoices coming in, we have blocked American Express because it has a much higher percentage rate from a processing fee. So we were able to disable that, but we cannot disable rewards credit cards because they come in as a regular Visa and or MasterCard. And
Franco, are we shopping around? I mean, is that something we can do better at? Try to get some of the lower rates.
So we've got the lowest rate right now in the industry because of our utility discount. So moving to another processor, unlike a small business where they give you that additional discount of a fraction of a percentage point to switch over, that doesn't apply in our business because of our utility discount. It's the flat rate regardless of who does the processing. So we've got the lowest rate in town right now. It's just a matter of how do we eliminate those rewards cards. And the best way that other municipalities are doing it is to, if they want to pay with a check or an electronic check online, meaning using the routing number and checking account number, there's no cost to the customer. If they want to use a credit card, then they'll just have to pay the processing fee anywhere from $3 to $4, depending on what we can get negotiated.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Ed, do you want to continue on with your presentation?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
Okay, so this next slide gets into a little bit more detail, lots of detail in these presentations. You're hopefully getting used to that with me by now, but a lot of stuff. So deposit summary, and what does this tell us? I'll do my best to get through it. I may have to use my lifeline called Franco to help me out, but I'll go through this. So the total deposit on hand in the top left-hand side, we see numbers for commercial, residential, and combined. So what this says is, hey, for our customers who are currently, gone beyond the cut line, if you will, we've got $186,000 in deposits on the commercial accounts that are involved, $450,000 for the residential, and then if you look to the right, you'll see $221,000. So what does that mean? That means that our commercial deposits for these accounts that are in question total $186,000. They owe us $221,000. So you can see they owe us more than the deposit amount. Now, there's not that's in what we would call in aggregate, right? If you drill down and do an account by account review, which Franco and his team have done, they've literally gone through 1,578 customer accounts that are beyond the cut period and looked at their specific deposits and applied it to their specific balance. You can see that even if we were to apply their deposit to the current balance due, we'd still have an $84,000 exposure there. Same thing on residential. If we went up ahead and if and I say we because we can't do it as staff, if the commission authorizes us to go do something like this, bring this value to the customers, this is what it would mean. So residentials, we'd have an exposure of $291,000, even if we did allow the residential customers to use their deposit. That's because some customers have a large deposit, some have a small deposit, and some have none. So you have to look at it on an account by account basis. You can't just draw generalities, based on the big numbers. So even if we applied all of the deposits into the 1,500 plus accounts that's available, we'd still have an exposure of $375,000 as a city. And you can see what's the total remaining after deposit is applied in balances. Now, there's a split here between commercial and residential, and we can see that about 12% or 191 accounts of the 1,578, about 12% are commercial and about 88% are residential. And then you can see the breakdown by the dollar numbers that are involved. So just as an example, there are 4 accounts on the commercial side that are in the range of $5,000 to $7,000 or $5,000 to $7,500 in arrears, even if we take their deposits and allow them to bring their deposits in to make their accounts current. So again, that's something of a policy matter, definitely that you all have to decide whether you want to offer the customers this option. But about 2.1% of our customers fall into that category of the commercial customers. And you can just go right down, in the classifications in terms of the aging. If you look to the right on the residential side, we can say that 190 customers would have a remaining balance of less than $100 to pay off if we allow them to bring their deposits to make their account current. That number is 531 would completely go to zero. So you're looking at about 720, if I do the math real quick, of our residential customers that are on this cut list, if you will, would be under $100 to pay off over some period of time if we were to allow them to apply their deposits. 1,578 customers out of 27,300 roughly. That's a sizable number. We do greatly appreciate all the customers who have been paying on time. It goes without saying, we're talking about the folks here who need help. I think we also have to give a shout out for the customers who have continued to pay on time throughout this entire process. That says a lot. So we greatly appreciate that they're doing that. So this is what the numbers look like if we were to pursue an option of allowing customers to take the deposit that they currently have on hand with us and apply it to their outstanding balance if they're on this cut list.
Commissioner Maxwell, did you have a question?
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Ed, I'm reading your chart here and I understand it very clearly, but does this also speak, I don't think it does this also speak to residential customers who have no deposit? How many of those folks are in arrears right now?
I've got to use my lifeline on this one, Franco. Do you have an answer to that? Do you have a rough answer, an idea?
Franco?
Yes, I apologize if you can repeat the question.
Thank you. The question is, out of curiosity, how many customers do we have that have no deposit on record that are in arrears right now?
So I apologize, you broke up. How many customers do we have on record that are?
That have no deposit with us? Are
So
in
I've got data that created this summary. So I'll have to look at the raw data and I can get back to you with the response.
Okay, do you have a gut feeling, roughly?
I can pull it up here. I just need to minimize this presentation and pull up that spreadsheet. If you give me a few minutes, I can get back to you with the response.
Yeah, well, I'll let Ed go ahead with this presentation. Thank you. I'm just kind of curious. When I look at the top of the residential chart and I see 5 accounts, and this is where my math, I see 5 accounts, so I'm reading this correctly. After their deposit is applied, they're up, they could be anywhere from $2,000 to $6,000 behind. And is this basically 2 months, Bill?
Yeah, probably. It's probably over 2 months, right? Because they're past the 42-day mark. In order to get on this list, these customers are at least behind more than 42 days as of Thursday, May 21st. That's how they're on this list of 1,578 customers.
Well, these are, if I'm not mistaken, these look like very high users to begin with. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hardy, did you have a question before he resumes his presentation? Unmute. Commissioner Hardy?
Yeah, thank you. Look, so we could discuss this now or in your later slides, which I see discussed options, but if you apply their deposit to their balances, would you not then need the customer to build up the deposit again? And why or why not? And then if the answer is yes, then I guess how would you get them to build up those deposit balances again in a way that would be different from simply asking them to pay the past due balance over a period of time?
That's a good question, and let me put it this way: we wanted to be compassionate and use the concept that if you're some of these folks that are truly in need. Now we suspect, but we can't prove that there's some that are just working the spread, right, the float, because we've allowed them to do that. How many? We have no idea. We'll never know. But we also know that there's probably a very large percentage of them that are really in trouble. So what we want to be able to do is allow them to use the money that they've already given the city to hold as a deposit in this really unusual circumstance that we find ourselves in, they find themselves in too, as a one-time thing to do this. So what would not be fair would be a month later said, now you're late, now you have to rebuild it, and you have to rebuild it higher than it was before.
Right, and certainly not immediately, right?
Correct.
But I guess, over time you would want, because there's a function to deposits.
Yes.
And if you want that function to go unfulfilled, then that's a different policy discussion that would be generated by any policy decision we would make about this. But if you want that function to remain fulfilled, then we would have to recoup the deposit eventually. And so, I guess, what I'm saying is, if there are two options, one that requires them to pay money back over a period of months, the other also requires the same, but one is less complicated, being as it's directly tied to their, the balance, that they haven't paid, and the other is a little more convoluted because it's about, okay, we applied your deposit and now we're going to need you to rebuild your deposit back, right? Which one would you have us? And I know I'm getting maybe 2 slides ahead or maybe 1 slide ahead. I'm not really sure at this point, but which would you suggest that we do?
Well, one suggestion would be to not paint the customer into a corner where they're going to have to immediately a month later say,
Right.
Now you've hit the number of late payments, or you've been disconnected, or you've got a bad check. What we want to do is give them some period of time during which those rules are suspended,
Right.
and allow them some grace period, because the basic premise here is that these folks are in financial difficulty. We're going to go with what's likely for the majority. So we want to give them some period of time where, as long as they stay on their payment plan, if you want to call it a payment plan that they would go on to, everything's okay. But if you default, then you've defaulted on the payment plan, which was to help you out of the hole. Then it's a different story.
Right. I'm asking if they're put on a payment plan, would you rather have would you rather just keep the deposit on file, right? Or on, on our books, and have them put on a payment plan for the balances they owe? Or would you apply their deposits and put them on a payment plan for the deposit that they're going to have to build back up again?
Well, the payment plan would not include rebuilding the deposit. Their deposit would basically be at zero unless they had a subsequent event which required the deposit to go up.
Okay, so all right, so what you're saying is that if we were to take this option, and I know I'm like 2 slides ahead, but the data is right here on this slide. If we were to take this option of applying their deposit to their past due balance, what you're saying is, for these customers, we just don't have a deposit anymore, period, forever, amen, unless there's another event that would require us to ask for their deposit again. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. That's the concept. Now, obviously, as staff, we're not policymakers, and one could say, hey, by putting a concept out there, you're trying to make policy. But no, we're putting these concepts out there, and these are something that you as a body would have to debate. And what we're looking at for tonight is some consensus or direction, so we can bring you back something more formal to actually have a motion on and vote to approve. But that's certainly a concept. So one concept, it could be to apply to deposit and not replenish deposit amounts unless there was a subsequent event. The other concept could be to apply to deposit and then rebuild the deposit back to the original amount over time. And the other, I guess the third option would be to not apply to deposit, just go on a payment plan to make up the past due amounts. And then obviously, we've already said no late fees. So we don't want to see people getting hit with a late fee every month if they're on a payment plan, unless they're late on the payment plan itself, right? So once you're on a payment plan, you kind of get absolution, if you will, from continuing to get late fees unless you've missed the plan. So these are all concepts that we're putting out there. And I know it's complicated, but it's also about who are we as Citizens-Owned Energy and a community organization, knowing that we want to help those around us, but at the same time, we do need to collect this money that we're owed. We can't forgive it.
Okay, Vice Mayor?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Ed, I support a payment plan. And, you know, the last thing I want to do is set anybody up for failure. But also, if we move forward with using their utility deposits, this is where I think the app and the prepay system would come in. Because if, from what I understand, and, you know, it'll probably be later on where Joel or you will explain exactly the prepay plan for residential. From what I understand, if you choose the pre-plan, either residential or commercial, your deposits would be lower because you're setting it up. Is that correct?
That's correct. If you were to go on a prepay plan, you wouldn't need to have a deposit at all.
So if we were, you know, I support trying to get them on a plan to pay back, but if we go in the direction where we're using their utility deposits, maybe that's an option, is to push those people into a prepay system where, you know, their utility deposits will, you know, be less coming in, you know, almost as a new customer.
Right.
Okay. Question for you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
My question is going to be, how does it affect the organization? Is really what I want to know in reference to allowing them to use their deposits. Does it help us in the short term, knowing we're going to be, by the numbers you gave us the last report, and maybe they're here to follow as well, but knowing how far we were going to be behind, as long as we stretched out the no terminations, no this, no that, whatever. Does accepting the deposits and putting them from basically one column to the next in, you know, in your accounting procedures, does it open up cash flow for us to take that? And does it provide a better financial picture for us now based on how long we're going to be seeing the numbers decline?
Yes, it does. It helps us in a near term in two ways. One is it sends a clear message to our stakeholders, in this case, the rating agencies, the bondholders, that we're not forgiving revenues, because we've pledged revenues, we've got revenue bonds, right? So that's important that they know that we expect that these monies would be repaid. The second is that it keeps it in some portion of it, a larger portion of it in the current fiscal year, as opposed to spreading it across the remainder of this fiscal year and into the following fiscal year. So it does help us in that regard. It'll help when we do the 2020 financial audit at the end of the year. So when we do the CAFR, if you will, and the fund balance, it'll look a little bit better if we brought more cash into the current fiscal year. That's certainly the case, it will.
Yeah, I just thought is the longer we make it, you know, we lighten up on the rules and extensions and things of that nature. If we can do that, as well as, you know, give people the opportunity to pay off balances and things like that, we might need a kind of a couple of different ways that we're going to do this. But I think that some people, I know in the commercial sector too, some people are very well aware of what their deposits are, and some are not. there might be found money for them to help them get back on track, and also put money in our bank too, and not have to stress them out taking out of their cash flow.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
okay.
we're taking a little bit different approach than an investor-owned utility might be, because we're also we're the city, and it's in our best interest to see these residents stay on their feet, and our businesses to stay on their feet, being able to keep the doors open and keep going, because they're also paying taxes, right? And they're providing a community service. They're a part of our community. That's important. So we have a little bit different approach than a purely investor-owned entity might have.
Okay, Commissioner Hardy, then Commissioner Maxwell, you're up after him, and then the Vice Mayor after that.
Yeah, quick question. How many total customers do we have?
We have about 27,300 active electric accounts between residential and commercial.
Okay, do we have any insight into what FPL may do at the end of their shut-off moratorium, their approach to recovering lost revenue during this time?
We don't have any intelligence other than what they provided in writing to their customer base, which you all have received a copy of today. So we gave you, for the benefit of the public that's not, did not see this document, we were able to compile today a document which has examples of 4 or 5 or 6 utilities in the state of Florida, one of which is FPL. FPL is going to resume service cuts it appears in that article on July 1. And they don't go into the details of what arrangements they're going to make with customers, other than to have a one-on-one conversation, a payment plan, and referrals to agencies. They didn't publish any more information that we know of than what's in that letter.
Okay, and what do you think the chances are that they would do what they typically do, for example, when there's a hurricane? Which is, they have to spend a bunch of money that they didn't expect to spend, and that, when they were, going back and forth with the regulator here in the state about rate setting, that, they didn't expect to spend, right? And so they just charge everybody a $2 whatever. Do you foresee them taking that approach at all?
Well, let me clarify something on that. FPL has a storm fund, and they charge storm expenses to the storm fund, which are then recovered from their customers over a multi-year period. So
right.
It's running a parallel fund balance.
Right.
This is different than a hurricane, though, in that
Sure.
In a hurricane, the power goes out. That means they're not producing it. They're not running up a fuel bill, if you will, for
Sure.
not producing. In our particular case, and everybody's case right now, not just ours, the customers are using even more than they did before. They're just not paying for it.
Right.
So I doubt that FPL will forgive these debts. I don't know what arrangements they may make. Whatever they do, it'll have to be approved by the Public Service Commission.
Right.
So there's going to be a lot of interveners and a lot of people seeking to make sure that the outcome is correct. So I'm not sure that even FPL knows what the outcome will be. They probably know what they're going to try to do, but we don't know what they're ultimately going to get.
So, and what I would hope is that we would look at our competitor and try to do however it is that they treat their customer, right? That we should try to treat them that way or better. Obviously, we have different finances and different, all sorts of, things here, locally. But I would hope that we keep a close eye on what FPL is doing. And to the extent that FPL has to reach out to, the regulating agency here in the state of Florida and get approval for whatever it's going to do after June, if its shut off suspension ends at the end of June, then, I hope we would follow that closely and that we would have some sort of presentation on that. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
So, Madam Mayor, if I could add a little bit more to that.
Yes, please.
Yeah. The difference in perhaps in some of these is that in the FPL model or any investor-owned utilities. I'm not picking an FPL at all. They're a tremendous company, but it is an investor-owned entity. Those revenues, if you will, or will have to be made up by somebody. So it's either going to be
Yes.
made by all the customers who did pay and continue to pay, as well as their shareholders. In a municipal entity like Worth, the bills that the 1,578 customers didn't pay will have to be paid by the 1,578 catching up, or those costs spread across the 26,000 other customers, right? So unlike, I'll draw an analogy to the federal government, we just can't, call downstairs the Treasury and have them print a bunch more dollars or change the value of the currency, right?
Right.
It's a zero-sum game. These bills have to be paid. And the question is, how is that going to happen?
Yeah, look, someone has to pay for the lunch, right? It's the old Econ 101 thing. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Someone has to pay for the lunch. And I think where we're trying to figure out is how do we pay for the lunch? And obviously, you want people to pay for what they use. And you want to be able to collect on that. Now, over time, as you know, we have people move in the city and out of the city and so on and so forth. So I suspect that over time, there's going to be an amount that just remains unpaid, right? And that is not collectible, period. No matter, what kind of payment plan, you put someone on, right? And so, the question is, how do we recover, the unrecoverable amount? That's obviously there's some that's recoverable from the people who owe the electric utility. And then there's some that will never recover from them. And the question is, like you said, who exactly pays for that lunch? And in our case, we don't have shareholders, but there are lots of things that we do with the earnings that we retain that don't amount to, a dividend. Right now, we're trying to build our earnings so that we can borrow money so that we can, do a large scale capital improvement program. That improvement program might end up being the payer of some of these issues, unfortunately, if it means that we have to delay or put some of this stuff off. You don't want that to be the case, but I certainly want to know how our competitor is thinking about doing this, and I want to figure out how we can pay for this, as responsibly as possible.
Good questions. Who is up next, Selena? Commissioner Maxwell, you're up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I apologize. I was a few minutes late for the meeting. I have a little mobility problems today with my legs. Is the purpose of this meeting, Ed, to give you direction on what to do with collection of these payments, or whether we use deposit? Is that the purpose, or is this more of an informational meeting tonight?
Good question. So what we envisioned was that tonight we would gather your thoughts as a consensus and then bring you back something more formal to approve or disapprove, modify at a subsequent meeting. That's part of it. The other part of it is that we need to give the city manager direction on what to do on June 1. So the current suspension of the disconnects goes through the end of May. And I know the city manager is probably in the background here somewhere. He would probably like some direction, a sense from the commission on what do we do on June 1? Are we continuing with the current plan for some period of time, or are we pulling the suspension off? So that's a policy decision that I leave to this body.
Okay, well, I guess there's a number of questions then that need to be answered before we can even start having the conversation about giving direction. I think one of the first questions that needs to be asked is, how much money was in arrears before the pandemic started? We went into a crisis mode. Who those customers are and how much they were behind. Number two, we need to establish the date of when this crisis, in terms of bills not being paid, or however you want to phrase it, began. We need to establish that time frame so we all know what we're looking at in terms of months of service. Okay, and the reason I say that is because the next question will be, what is the average bill? And like I said a little bit earlier, just rough numbers, I come up with like $237 a month on average for commercial and residential customers, everybody combined, is what these bills are. Is that a reasonable number, Ed?
I think it's probably low. And Franco can do a calculation for us on what the average bill is. But in terms of where we were when we started, if we go back to the aging report, which I have on the screen, in the first column, in the 318 column, 30 days aging, if I go all the way to the bottom, this is total utilities, electric and water. We had $240,000 that was more than 30 days late. And we had, call it 19.9, call that $20,000. So we had roughly $260,000 that was at least 30 days late. Today, that number is 639,000, call it 640. That's at least 30 days late, and another 231,000 that is at least 60 days late.
Right.
The numbers I've got. So that's the, and we track this every couple of days. Franco reruns this report for me, which is why we gave you the update, even though we sent you the slides a few days ago. These numbers are growing, every day. So,
well, I think it's important that the commission decide on what time frame is our start, jumping off point from, I appreciate your data here with the aging report, but we need to establish, and you can help us with that, Ed, when a good date would be so we can start figuring out, okay, folks who have been in a non-shut-off mode, non-fee mode for 2 months, 2 months and 2 weeks, 5 weeks, whatever it is, whatever we ultimately decide on, we need to put that in black and white. And we also need to have a number of what the average bill is for customers during that time period that went unpaid. And the reason I say that is because once you see the average monthly bill that's gone unpaid, I think it's a lot easier for us to make a decision on how best to recover this money in terms of a payment plan. I mean, on one hand, we think, oh my Lord, everybody's in dire straits. And yes, a lot of people are hurting, and they're hurting very badly. But if it turns out that, and again, I'll preface anything I say is $1 is a lot of money if you don't have $1, okay? But what I'm saying here is, if we determine, let's say that we have a 3-month window where folks weren't having their power turned off and fees weren't being assessed, and the average bill was $250, so on average, there's a $750 liability or whatever that needs to be collected on average from a customer, then it helps us better to determine how to best set up that payment plan. Is it a 6-month payment plan? Is it a 9-month payment plan? Is it a 12-month payment plan? Also, I would recommend that we shy away from considering a full use of a deposit to cover that expenditure. I would suggest that we use a half a month deposit maximum to go towards that balance, okay? Because I don't want to see us in a situation where we burn up that deposit, put folks on a deposit payment plan, and then unfortunately there are going to be people out there that aren't going to be able to do it. We're going to be in worse shape than we were to begin with because we burned the deposit money up front. And also the FP&L memo that you provided for us tonight, Ed, did reference, I guess there's a link on the FP&L website for state, local, and federal agencies to help folks with the utility bills. We need to make that as our first line of how folks can get back in current, if you will, with their bills after they exhausted that. And last but not least, I will tell you all right now that as it stands right now, unless some of the data changes or whatever, I am absolutely opposed to any discussion about an across the board, a fee for the entire system to cover the cost of these delinquent bills. I don't think it's fair at this point to ask people who have paid their bills, to pay for the folks that haven't paid their bills. Now, for those of you who are listening or want to repeat me or whatever and try to twist this into being callous and insensitive, it's not about that at all. It's all about trying to keep it simple and keep it in front of us. If people realize that they have something for free, I mean, they were talking about this today nationally about the unemployment situation and how some people are not going back to work as states open up, because in many cases, people are making more money on unemployment than they were when they were working, okay? We don't want to put ourselves in that position where people think they've got this perpetual safety net, if you will, and they could get by without paying their bills. And again, I want to make sure we do everything we can to help them, but I don't want to necessarily, as a first course of action, just go ahead and say, let's go ahead and assess a fee for everybody to make up the difference. That's all I have. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I have a point of order.
Hold on, point of order regarding what?
So it would appear that there are two purposes to this meeting: gathering consensus on revenue recovery and giving the city manager direction on the utility shutoff moratorium, which expires at the end of this month. But there's no agenda item stating that. And it would appear then that we are certainly furthering public policy, but the public basically wasn't given any notice as to those two purposes of the meeting. The only thing you'll see on the agenda is a presentation, electric utility update, but there was no indication that we were going to be considering and deliberating on policy, nor was there any indication on which policy we would be deliberating on this evening. And so I worry, frankly, that we will have, first of all, doing this sorts of thing at this part of the presentation would kind of be out of order. Excuse me, under this agenda section, which is presentation, would kind of be out of order. But in addition to that, I worry about the notice issue. I think that's a real concern. If we were going to consider directing the manager to do X, Y, or Z today, then that should have been on the agenda, because the public had no idea that those were the two purposes of the meeting.
Well, it's under my impression that when we have consensus in the past, it's actually us offering consensus to the department director, to the city manager, to bring back actual items where we allow for public comment and pre-noticing. So us giving consensus, we've done it a number of times before, and we did it in the last meeting, I think, or the meeting before that. It's offering our consensus to bring something back formally that relates to our conversation and what we feel about it, but certainly not vote on it until we have proper public comment and noticing.
Point of order, madam?
Is it point of information or order? Because
I could be asking, or I could be saying that I think there's an issue with the order. The one thing I'll say is that yes, we've given direction before, but we've done so under agenda items that give the public the opportunity to say, yes, here's what the commission is considering. We did that at the last meeting. For example, we had a workshop about vacation rentals, and because we had the workshop and it was under our business, the public was able to comment and so on and so forth, which is what's supposed to happen when we're furthering public policy. Here, it's pretty clear that the manager is asking us our thoughts about something official that he's supposed to do. Whether we make a motion and vote yay or nay, it's pretty clear that what we're doing is deliberating and furthering public policy in this meeting, and yet the public has no opportunity to weigh in on that because it's out of order in the agenda, and because on the agenda there are no items for this issue, which is the revenue recovery issue, nor is there an item under the agenda for giving the city manager direction on the utility moratorium. You could have read this agenda tonight and had no idea that the commission would be giving the manager direction on this particular issue. And I think that, and I'm interested to hear what Christy has to say, but I don't think I'm raising an objection that has no right. But excuse me, Commissioner Amoroso, who held something up. There's no opportunity for public comment here, and again, I'm interested to hear what Christy has to say.
Did you want to make a comment, Christy? I'm just confused because we've always had, that's my problem with this items on the agenda that say discussion, because we seem to always get into a quagmire whenever there's an item that says discussion or consensus, and it happens all the time. And I brought this up numerous times. It always happens. Either put it up as a workshop item or an agenda item. You know what I mean? We can't
This is a presentation. Yeah, this isn't even.
No, but we had backup, and everyone read the backup, I would assume, before coming to this meeting, and you would see what was expected of staff by the backup, and you could have raised the question, with us beforehand, with staff before.
Okay, well, but madam, it does not say that in this meeting it says next steps. At the end of the presentation, it says next steps. That could be next steps as in the next meeting. That could be next steps as in the next several months, or that could be next steps as in right now, this meeting today. It's frankly not clear, but the fact of the matter is this is a presentation. It's not an item as we would typically have it, under new business where we would either discuss it or an action item. This isn't any one of those. And I agree the whole and I've had plenty of conversation with Christy about the quandaries that we get into with the discussion items. I agree, but this isn't even a discussion item. This is a presentation. And there was no indication that the commission this night would be directing the city manager to do a thing. And I'm wondering Christy, am I
Christy,
saying nothing that makes any sense at all here?
Yeah, I think we're talking about, can you hear me, Mayor and Commissioners?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I think we're talking about two separate issues. So, obviously, I think the mayor has pointed out that we need to develop some clarity in this situation where oftentimes we have a work session and there's no motion that's proposed because staff is really looking for direction. And the goal is, I think, based on the last work session we have, is to make that very clear that we're just looking for consensus and direction to staff to bring something back. I think with Mr. Liberty's presentation tonight on the next steps that's defined within his presentation is to look for some direction so that they can start forming up an official action to bring back to you. Because I think looking further along in his presentation, he's throwing out different options, and this is a huge issue with a bunch of ins and outs, and we need to start narrowing it down in terms of making decisions moving forward. And I think that's where he's looking for some hints on how to narrow the options that are out there. So that's one issue in my mind. The other issue in terms of the manager getting some direction on the issue with the no cutoffs, and correct me if I'm wrong, as I recall on this issue, it was an issue that was left within the city manager's parameters of making an emergency decision. And I don't believe we had any public comment initially on that decision. I think on the decision to extend it, it might have been under one of his presentations where he said that was what his intent was to do, and everybody sort of went along with it. So I would say for that issue, we should stay the course of how we've done it so far. Even though he's looking for some direction, it's still within his purview of making that decision based on the initial resolution we did at the outset of the pandemic. So I think there's two separate issues here. I think Commissioner Hardy, you're correct, along with the mayor, that this is an area that we need to further develop and look closer at our agenda items to make sure there's clarity in what we're asking for from the commission so that we can provide that proper notice to the residents and folks who are watching to understand what we're going to do. But please keep in mind that public participation is authorized in conjunction with the Sunshine Law, but we're not required to publish every item that's going to be on an agenda. So if at the end of a meeting, when someone provides a comment or the manager goes over an issue, if something comes up and someone says, hey, I think that's a great idea, don't we all agree? Let's ask the manager to go forward with that issue. Very likely it's not an issue on the agenda, and we're not required to publicize every potential item that could come up in a meeting. So we're going to try to balance that and make sure the agenda items are clear to provide as much notice and public participation that's required. But it's one of those areas where there are some gray areas in terms of what we have to allow people to comment on.
Okay.
And Christy, I just want to be, really clear here. Part of the issue is about where this takes place on an agenda. We are apparently giving direction, and we've had this same discussion before in an electric utility meeting, no less, a while back, about us giving direction to the city manager on an item that's under a presentation. That's an issue. Typically, and I understand that we have previously put stuff under new business or what have you on a workshop, And that's been, the way, whether we take a vote or not, whether the public is allowed to comment or not, the public is at least given notice that this day, this meeting, the commission is going to give the city manager direction on X, Y, Z, ABC, whether we allow them to comment or not, whether we have to under the statute. That's their way of knowing. But if someone looked at this agenda today, they would not see anything about us deliberating about anything. All they would see is we're getting a presentation. They would see what the presentation is about. And at the very end of the presentation, they would see next steps for this institution, the city, but they wouldn't necessarily be able to infer from that next step that what we're doing here today is directing the city manager to do X, Y, Z. That's not a very clean and orderly way to do something like this. And I would hope in the future, as I've said before, when we've given direction under a presentation item during an electric utility meeting, that we would outline these things in the agenda the way we normally would under new business or what have you, because I don't think this is fair to the public.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor Amoroso?
I just wanted to make one more point about deposits. I'm very concerned that we would be using deposits. If you remember, not that long ago, we had a big issue with people and their deposits, and a lot of people skipping town with large amounts of money being owed to the city. So I would hate to put us back in that situation. Again, I think the payment plan is the easiest. Ed, can you tell us how many people out of the 1,500 are actually stepping up to take advantage of the payment plan?
We haven't offered the payment plan to anybody yet.
Okay.
We
So
don't have the authority to do that at the moment.
All we're doing right now is referring them to Palm Beach County's situation with helping them pay their utility bills?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Robinson? You're muted.
All right, here we go. Thank you. Couple things. I was wondering about the number of people that have moved out. I know Ed, I think, said that our customers are increasing, but the people that owed money that have actually moved out of the city, I don't know that we have a number on that. And I mentioned anybody offering to make some payment. So we need a plan to accept that. Is that how that would go? And
may I address the question?
Please do so, Ed. Thanks.
Okay, so we're not seeing an exodus of people leaving the territory. We actually have a net gain.
you said that.
As we present, we don't have an update on that slide, but we did present it the last time. Currently, my understanding, the landlords are not able to evict people either, and we're not able to collect utilities. So there's nothing that's forcing people out, other than just a natural change of address that they want to make to go to a new place of domicile. So we're not pushing people out.
Yeah, and to Commissioner Hardy's point is that we're taking steps, and this conversation about this is a good step. I was interested in who wasn't paying before February, not having electricity, and I would be okay with if those people lost the ability to have their lights on because they didn't pay before February. And I'm wondering, when we talk about people's ability to collect unemployment, I'm wondering if any conversation was in that conversation was in reference to a minimum pay scale. I just, the ability of a living wage is utilities are part of that. So that's, this is a really, really difficult decisions. And I'm not ready to make a decision based on the conversations tonight, although it was greatly needed and appreciated. The Sunshine Law has not allowed us to have more conversations. We will have to make a decision. The public needs to know that we're going to change some of our policies. And I'm really probably not even ready on June 2nd to, other than to extend it, say a month at a time, to come to a consensus and a vote. Thank you. Done.
Thank you. When I looked at the backup material, I thought, and you want to bring back some different types of plans that we can vote on with public comment on as to what kind of relief we can give our customers. I think that would be the next logical step for that. I wasn't under the impression that we would be making a decision on extending the, or at least giving you consensus of extending the non-cutoff utilities, only because I know what was said at the very beginning when we started this policy and this policy took place is that we follow our closest peer, which is FP&L. And, that's how that all began in the first place. We followed FP&L announced. They didn't even really formally announce, I don't think, in a press release like they normally did, but came on right after that. So I would assume with this policy known today that we would be looking at extending the non-shutoffs for an additional month. So that would be of consensus. I thought we were going to at least do that because it's the end of May and June 1st is here practically. And I was under the, I thought that was just common sense considering all the big hoo-ha we had about instituting the policy in the first place after FP&L, that we would want to make that decision now before it happens again.
Right, Madam Mayor. So you're correct. We're trying to get some sense of direction on what to go forward instead of the a menu with pick 2 from column A, 3 from column B, and 12 from columns. So we're just trying to get a sense of to narrow the field of the options that we would bring you. And we don't have to go through the rest of the package in detail, but what's in there, I included some portions, relevant portions of existing resolutions that would need to be modified or amended or addressed before we do certain things that are currently not allowed to be done. So that was there for educational purposes.
Do you have the financial ramifications of when we do this non-shutoffs like you did in the last meeting in regards to down the road, what it looks like if we did it, adding a month at a time? I know that the last meeting you had kind of.
That's in, yeah, I know the presentation's not up at the moment. And I don't think it is anywhere, not on my slide, but if you go back to the financials slide, I think it was slide number 4 of the package, the 7+5 forecast. That gives you a sense of what happens is if we continue through the rest of the year.
Is that through October?
Yes, it's through October 1.
Through our fiscal year, okay.
The impact on the fiscal year if we continue either at a 10% or 15%. So right now we're running between 10 to 15% reduction in revenues. If you carry that out to the end of the year, what the impact is.
Okay.
That's just our attempt to kind of bracket the solution, if you will. Say we're probably going to be between these 2 lines someplace if we stay on the trajectory that we're on today. I do expect that the 60-day aging number is going to keep going because now we're well past the 60-day mark from when we started this process. What we have seen is the total number of customers affected is not growing dramatically because some customers are paying, even though they were on the cut list before. They're now paying, they're off the list, but some new customers have come onto it. So the number goes up and goes down. It's kind of floating in that 1,500, 1,300 to 1,500, 1,600 range right now. And we don't know, what the resilience of the customer base is in terms of being able to absorb that, continue going forward. But we do know that people are, businesses are opening up and people are starting to go back to work. And there's certainly anecdotal evidence out there that certain industries have continued to work throughout. But be that as it may, we know that there's pain, and we're trying to find a way to transition back to some normal business.
Was Franco looking at putting some numbers? I remember he was going to check earlier. Was it about people that had not, that were now not paying their bills, that formerly had paid their bills?
Madam Mayor, this is Franco. So the questions that I was asked to look up are how many customers had zero deposit? So the answer to that is there are 12 commercial customers that don't have a deposit or have a zero deposit. There are 341 residential customers on that list of 1,578 that have a zero deposit. And then the other question that was asked was, what is the average bill? So of those 1,578 customers on that list that are past due, the average past due balance for commercial customers is $1,159. For residential customers, the average past due balance of the list of 1,578 is $469.
Okay, thank you very much, Franco. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Harvey?
Yeah, so I think we should keep the shut-off moratorium certainly through June for as long as our competitor is. And we should have a conversation toward the end of June about what to do after that. And as far as revenue recovery, you know, I'm certainly not prepared. And when I say not prepared, you know, I mean that I would need much more information about the pros and cons of each method, whether it's applying a deposit and having someone build the deposit back over a period of time on a payment plan, or whether it's just putting them on a payment plan directly on their past due balance and having them pay that off over a period of time. You know, I would need to really think for a lot longer about the pros and cons of each before I'm prepared to say which I am for today. And I would certainly like to give the public an opportunity to weigh in on this matter, and frankly on the utility shutoff matter, in the way of public comment. I think that that's critical for both. But look, we're at the end of the month, we got to extend the moratorium. But on the revenue recovery, I really think that we should, you know, deliberate with this being on the agenda in the right place and with a little more information and with the public being given an opportunity to weigh in on it.
Agreed. And that's why I asked Ed too. I said, can you come back and bring best practices for recovery into the next as different agenda items that we can discuss and have public comment on, and make some good solid decisions with backup information as to how they benefit the public and how they will help keep us running. That would be fantastic. In the meantime, Vice Mayor Pro Tem, you've got your hand up.
Yes, ma'am. So can you hear me? You know, one thing we haven't talked about tonight when we talk about recovery, and I don't want to add salt to the wound, but we don't know what our landlords are going to do at the end of this period, when the governor lifts the ability to potentially evict folks. And that's something we need to consider, because let's be honest, and you know, if somebody is 2 or 3 months behind on their rent and they don't have a job or whatever's going on, you know, God love them. I don't know what they would do other than, if they're being evicted, what can they do other than to be evicted? And if that's going to be the case, then I would say that the chances of us recovering our utility bill is very, very small at that point. So I think it's another factor we need to, you know, kind of keep in the back of our minds, you know, as we start thinking about what's the best way to handle the recovery process. And as I said earlier, you know, a lot of people are hurting very badly, and my heart goes out to them. And what we are talking about tonight, what we've talked about for the last 2 months, are going to be the most important things we've ever had to talk about as public servants. And you know, the decisions we make are not going to have made and will make should not be taken lightly. And we should, you know, really sharpen our pencils and sharpen our focus to do the very best we can to get the best outcome for everyone. That's all I have, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. Couldn't agree with you more. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I agree with Commissioner Maxwell. That's why I think that we need to move forward as quickly as possible with some direction to Ed as far as reaching out to people and offering a payment plan and what that looks like. Because, you know, again, the longer we wait, the longer the recovery will be. And if we get to the point where we can't recover, you know, people need to know that they have options and what those options are, and that they have the ability to make payments and, you know, get back on the right track.
Great. Now, question for you, Ed, you have more of a presentation, don't you?
Yes, I do. But we can talk through it. I think Keith probably took the screen sharing function
You
away.
know what? 1 second, Commissioner Robinson, did you want to add one more thing before we go back to the presentation?
I just had a question are there people that are trying to make some payment and we're not accepting nothing but a full payment? Is that
No,
true?
Madam Mayor, if I may,
Please, Ed, thank you.
we take any payment.
All right, all right.
We are
But
taking.
we don't know how many are making an attempt.
Off the top of my head, I don't know if Franco has that data readily available, but I'm not aware that we turn away anybody who wants to give us money.
But we don't know how many. Okay.
I don't know the number right now at the meeting, but we can certainly, you know, get that information. And if I'm incorrect, we'll let you know as well. And we'll correct the record on that. But
Ed, you can reshare your screen.
There we go.
Okay. So, Madam Mayor, should I continue?
Yes, please. Thank you, Ed.
Okay, you're welcome. So what we wanted to do on this slide was just remind everybody that we've had two folks from our conservation group in the revenue protection group who have graciously been willing to take this on. And they've done a fantastic job. They've made over 3,400 calls, almost 3,500 calls after 30 days of making calls. They've gotten 1,387 voicemails, 1,418 customers they've actually talked to, and they've mailed almost 1,300 flyers. So that has begun to yield some results. We've got 24 customers who are already been issued what we call a commitment letter from the agency. That doesn't mean that there's only 24. There's another 481 that have applied. So there's more in the pipeline, and the agency is working their way through the process on those. So it's been of value. I think a little over $9,000 has been committed. It's a laborious process, but I'm not aware of any other utility that's actually doing this on a proactive basis, calling these customers and you know, pushing them, not pushing them, but pushing information to them so that they can go get the help that they need. What we don't know is how many of them are really worthy in the agency's eyes of that help. I don't know what that process looks like, and we respect the privacy of the customer and not getting into their individual financial situation. That's between them and the agency. Next slide. You know, maybe an understatement after we've said this, you know, what we have already said so far is that we need a plan. And this plan has to allow customers to catch up on their bills so that, and we have to be able to create our 2020 forecast better than we are now and budget for 2021. So if some of the 2020 revenue that's been deferred is going to come in 21, we need to know that so we can budget and know what to anticipate in 21 if there's going to be a spillover from one year into the next. Very important that this plan needs to be defined in advance so customers know what to expect and to give us time to create the processes to actually implement the plan. So Franco and his team have already thought ahead and jumped ahead together with IT and our bill processing entity to figure out what capability we do have. So if we say put people on a budget, is it possible to put people on a budget? If we have a revenue catch up, if we want to grab or allow customers to grab their deposits, will they actually be able to do that? So they're checking the systems to see what they're capable of doing. And if that's the path that the commission subsequently directs us to go down, that it's one that we'll be able to implement. And it goes without saying, you know, I'm speaking to the policymakers that it needs to balance the needs of all of the customers and our financial obligations. So it's not just what we want to do for the customer who's in distress at the moment, but it's what we do for the customer who's been paying their bills all along while maintaining our cash flows, our coverage ratios that are required under our various bond covenants, and still achieve our working capital requirements as a utility. I'll leave it at that. So it's a balanced plan. We put this out there just as conceptual elements to spark debate and discussion, and to get a sense of where you all wanted us to go. It certainly appears that it's done that, since we are 2 hours into the meeting, so that's good. We did think that it was important to give some customers some phase-in period, so that they wouldn't suddenly find out, oh, today's the day. That they get some period of time. And if you look at what the other utilities have done, they're telegraphing phase-in periods. We threw a number out there of 30 days. If you want something different, big or small, that's fine. But I think it's important to let customers know that there's that there's an endpoint, and when that endpoint is, and that they know in advance. Another conceptual element, and purely conceptual, wasn't the plan, but it was a concept to throw out there, was the ability to apply the deposits. And then what we did is we pointed out that, hey, if we want to go down that path, we're going to have to make some changes or recognize that it's in conflict with these two city resolutions. And we put those out there. Another concept was to waive the late fees that were incurred since the 18th, which we've certainly done, and up to the date of the implementation of whatever the recovery plan is. So whatever fees people would have been incurring for being late continue to be waived. And then we spread the customer payment on the remaining balance. If it's the $460 bill and you spread it over 6 months, what is that number? Is it 6 months? Is it 3 months? Is it 9 months? Is it 12 months? We need some direction from you on what that ought to be. We talk a lot about our commercial customers, and this certainly sounds like a slide that's aimed more at the commercial customer, but it could certainly apply to a residential customer as well. Allowing the deposits to be used is in essence giving them access to that capital that they have tied up in their deposit. It enhances their benefits that they might receive under the PPP, federal programs or other state programs, allows them to use that as working capital if we were to go down that path. And it does it at zero cost of capital. And it's quicker to do than it might take them to go extend their lines of capital or lines of access to dollars, lines of credit. The benefit to the city, of course, is that the deposits are deployed locally, and that they don't take those deposits and we don't give them a check to go do whatever else they want to do with it. It's applied locally right to their utility bill. So it helps all of their customers if those bills are, the utility balances are more current than they are today. And then it helps the business focus on their resources, or focus their resources on opening and getting employees to work, hopefully many of which actually live here in the city. So this was, again, written from the standpoint of what this does for a commercial customer. You could make the same statement about a residential customer who's got a line of credit on a second or third mortgage on the house, right? A home equity line. That would have the same benefit for them. We then provided the resolutions to give you a little bit more detail, what's possible, so you see the context of what the resolution currently says and the sections that would need to be amended. And you can certainly read through that. For the residential customer, section 4A would need to be amended to allow that to be done, applied towards their current outstanding balance. And the commercial has to be amended as well, because other commercial customers don't have the opportunity to get the deposit back until they've actually closed the account. Residentials get the deposit back if they have a good payment history. And of course, no illegal use, goes without saying. But these are two areas that would have to be addressed if we decide that we want to use deposits. Other conceptual elements that we thought could be put on the table was to suspend the bill deposit review. So we've been reviewing people's deposits up until March 18th. If they had an event of default, they were on the disconnect list, for example, we would review their deposit for applicability and make sure that it was correct, and the deposit, if it was not correct, would have to be raised. We also thought that this recovery plan would be intended to apply to the previous accounts. So accounts that already existed when this crisis started, not new accounts that were created after the crisis started. That's something that we threw out there as a concept. You can weigh in on whether you like that aspect or not. And as in the line of questioning that Commissioner Hardy took us down, a customer who has a deposit applied to their outstanding balance would not have to replenish the deposit unless they have a subsequent occurrence that meets the criteria of the resolution 70-2013. So that means basically a subsequent default. So again, these are all concepts. There's many different paths that we can go down. We're trying to kind of squeeze the jello into a bowl here that you as policymakers could act on. This was the existing city resolution on deposit reviews and the criteria under which we would have to review a customer's deposit. So these are all things that we would propose be revisited during a recovery plan. And this was the same thing for commercial and as we saw for residential. What we saw when we said next steps, this is more of a wish list, if you will. What would we like to be able to come out of this meeting with some sense of of what you as a team are thinking? When should the no disconnect policy be phased out? We've given you some data points on a few other utilities. The most proximate, of course, is Big Blue that surrounds us. And we were looking to see if there's any kind of a consensus on what the elements of a plan should be. And then we would then take that and that consensus or thoughts and try to craft it into something that we could bring you in about 2 weeks in the form of a formal staff report and a motion for you to take some action on, either further modification, amendment, change, or an outright dismissal. But the intent here was to get some direction on where you wanted us to go. So I think that covers what we were looking for, to get a sense of tonight.
Okay, thank you, Ed. I appreciate that. Well, like I said, I think we probably would find consensus on the implementation of the continuation of our no shutoffs for the month of June. Again, based on policy that we had from the very beginning, people's power doesn't get turned off when we're in an emergency situation. And that, again, is we always follow our lead, our neighbors in the outside communities, and FP&L. So I think that we're safe to say we'd like to continue this. And do I have consensus on that? Thumbs up. Can't see.
A month at a time?
Huh?
A month at a time?
A month at a time, I'm fine with that. Commissioner Maxwell?
Yeah, I think we need to establish a date certain. I don't think we should just say it's indefinite. I think,
It was for the month of June.
well, does this have to be the whole month? Can we go to the middle of June?
I've lost my ability to raise my hand again.
I'm sorry about that.
Is that too complicated?
I think from a policy standpoint, changing mid-policy is probably going to be a little bit more difficult, but
Okay, fine.
if we can always go back, you know what I mean? If something
No.
comes up, something changes.
Get it?
Yep.
Okay. Commissioner Robinson, did you finally raised your hand?
Hey, I've got two.
Genius.
The governor may sway our policy. That's all.
Commissioner Hardy. You're muted again.
Again, in favor of extending the moratorium through June, we, again, will probably want to stay with our closest competitor, but I think the key thing would be to look at the emergency order. If the emergency order still has significant numbers of businesses shut down or significant business capacity shut down, we may want to consider a policy that tracks that order plus 30 days or something of that nature. But from here to June, sure. But if we're taking direction on what's going to come back to us in the future, and on the way to something to vote on, Commissioner Maxwell said we need a start date and an end date. I think that should probably track the emergency orders of the governor of the county.
Shoot.
Oh, City Clerk?
I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, you were
Oh,
muted.
yeah, I know.
So sorry.
I was talking to you. What's the matter? You didn't hear me?
I'm sorry.
I was saying public participation. I forgot to ask you if we had any comments.
Madam Mayor, I do have one. Ramsey Stevens of 618 South K Street writes, Madam Mayor, Honorable Commissioners, as a member of the Electric Utility Advisory Board, I ask you again to provide a response to our request to discuss policies that could provide economic relief to our community and make our utility more sustainable. This is an all hands on deck time for our community, and the Utility Advisory Board is ready, willing, and able to help. I hope you will finally provide us with a response this evening. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
That's all, Madam Mayor.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
So moved.
Second? Second?
So moved.
Who
Second.
made- Thank you. All those in favor state so by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Then I'll entertain a motion. Oh, you know what? Before I go, if you'll give me a mayor's point of privilege here. I just want to remind everybody, and of course I can't find it now. Where's my stuff? We have more testing that's coming. I know this isn't electric utility related, but we had a really amazing testing site at the Osborne Center last Friday, and Palm Beach County Fire Rescue and the county were absolutely terrific about it. And in fact, they said we did such a great job. They were looking forward to coming back and doing more. We know that a lot of people in our community, they're not going to go up to the Fit Team ballpark if they don't have transportation to go to a lot of places. And in our community, just like out in Belglade, we need people to come and into their communities. You know, they have issues of trust, they have issues of transportation. We need people in our communities. Yes, it's going to mean new realization of cases, but we're also looking at, you know, people that are a heartbeat for a working Florida, South Florida, and they are working very hard. But unfortunately, some people are getting sick in our community, and they need testing to be here. So tomorrow, I know it's last minute notice, but at the old Scottish Rite building, it's 2000 Northeast Street. We're going to have testing thanks to Palm Beach County Fire Rescue. Tomorrow from 11 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. 11 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. And on Friday again, 11 a.m. to 2:30. This time it's going to be at the Hatch. That's 1121 Lucerne Avenue. Those wishing to be tested, you do not have to have an appointment, and the test will be provided free of charge. You'll have a number to call so you get your results. Again, it's free, and you don't have to make an appointment, unlike some of the other sites. So again, tomorrow, Old Scottish Rite Building, 2000 North D, 11 to 2:30, excuse me, and the Hatch, 1121 Lucerne on Friday from 11 to 2:30. Super important, please, folks. If you wrote it down, share it with your neighbors. I know we sent out a press release about it and emails about it, but tell your friends. And again, anyone's exhibiting any symptoms whatsoever, please get them there this week. And people also in the risk categories with health risks, you don't have to have symptoms to come out and be tested. But please come on out and get tested this week. All right, thank you very much. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all those in favor state so by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you to my fellow commissioners. Thanks to everyone at home. Be well, be safe, and wash your hands.